In 1994, a family of 4 bought a land that exceeded their expectations. They were happy. It had everything they ever wanted and more, and for a relatively cheap price. But in less than 2 months of purchase, they started experiencing things that made them realize why this piece of land was so cheap in the first place. Some people have called this place supernatural, others cursed. One thing is certain: this 512 parcel of land is definitely mysterious. Located about 100 miles east of Salt Lake City, Utah, the Skinwalker Ranch is shrouded in so much mystery and death that even the natives stay away from it. This land was originally a settlement for the Indigenes of Utah. And no, I don't mean these people. I mean these people. The land was home to 2 native tribes, the Navajo and Utes. But there was a dispute between both tribes on who actually owned the land. And after much fighting and death, the Ute lost, and they had to give up this land to the victors. But before they did that, they laid a curse on the land that unspeakable creatures and horrors of the night would trouble this land, the occupants, and their descendants till the end of time. Centuries have passed, and the land has changed ownership since then. By the 20th century, this land was under the ownership of Kenneth and Edith Myers. The couple mostly kept to themselves, and nothing unusual was recorded about them. They used the land as a ranch and farm until their peaceful, normal demise. After the previous owners died, the land was empty for 7 years. It wasn't until 1994, before the land would get new owners, Terry and Gwen Sherman. Terry and Gwen Sherman moved in immediately with their 2 kids. They loved the ranch and were sure they had found the right place to live. The farmhouse, which was built on a high ridge, had a view of the ranch's wide green fields, dense forests, and bubbling creek to the south. Terry was thrilled with the more than enough space available for him to grow his cattle breeding business. Gwen, on the other hand, couldn't wait to go exploring with their kids. Plus, at the price they got the house, it was a steal. The land was the picture of peace and quiet. Not long after moving in, the Sherman family were unloading their things into their new home when Terry spotted a wolf in the pasture behind them. But this wolf was weird. It was at least 3 times as big as a normal wolf, and it acted in a very strange way. The wolf approached them rather nonchalantly, friendly even, and didn't seem frightened or cautious. It wagged its tail, almost like a dog, and even let Terry pat its head. Terry, seeing how well-behaved the wolf was, thought maybe the animal could be a pet to someone. Immediately, as if it read Terry's mind, the wolf turned around without hesitation and agitation and attacked a calf that was just walking around the edge of the field. Terry ran to a compartment in his truck and took his .35-7 Magnum and shot the wolf 3 times, but the animal wasn't hurt in any way. It just released the calf and ran off. Terry had no idea what he just saw. At that close range, 3 shots from a sus .35-7 Magnum should have been enough to kill it, but there was nothing, not even a blood trail. Terry shrugged off the incident and continued with moving in. Now, the next few weeks were mostly normal, except for some strange events that were happening around the farmhouse, and it seemed to be aimed at the wife, Gwen. At first, Gwen thought it was nothing. For example, she would come home from shopping, take the groceries out of the bags, and put them away. But when she came back a short time later, they were all back in the bags. She just thought, maybe she didn't really put out the grocery bag. One afternoon, Terry came home, angry, and demanded to know who had taken his tool for digging fence posts. He was fixing a fence in the field with it and had only turned his back for a second before it was gone. Gwen told him, no one. Despite their best efforts in looking for the tool, they couldn't find it. A couple of weeks later, it was found hanging in a tree on the other side of the land, after the family looked everywhere for it. This was when Gwen started telling her husband about the mind tricks that had been happening to her. The Shermans were beginning to think that something was wrong with the land. The family got a taste of what was to come in April 1995. It was nighttime, and Terry left the house to check on a cow giving birth in the field south of the house. On his way, he saw lights in the field. He thought they belonged to recreational cars, like four-wheelers driven by kids from a nearby farm. But that didn't make sense. The ranch is 3 miles from the main road and can't be reached because of a creek and a big rock hill. As Terry approached the lights lifted off the ground and traveled across the treetops that were up 40 to 50 feet tall and out of sight without making a single sound. Terry knew at that point that this wasn't an RV. The Shermans saw many lights and moving things in the months that followed. Most sightings occur during the new moon or when the sky is cloudy or stormy, and even on one night they saw more than a dozen of them. These lights were orange or blue in color, and they were usually larger and brighter. The Shermans tried to think of what was happening in normal terms, like finding a human explanation for the weird events. But when they started seeing dark, shadowy figures crawling out of the lights and into the fields nearby before disappearing, they gave up on rationalizing all of it. Their prognosis of this situation was looking more and more alien, more specifically, a portal for the aliens to go through. One theory that is consistent with alien abduction or interaction is the difference in the passage of time and how your mind plays tricks on you. When Alec Newlid was abducted, he thought he only spent hours, but it turned out it was 10 days. Travis Walton was the same thing. We did a deep dive into these two different stories in different places and times, but share similar stories. And now this family was experiencing manipulation in their perception of time and events. They were seeing lights hovering over their property. Like most alien abductees will tell you, in such, the light at times will be so strong that it can knock you out. And guess what? The city of Utah back then was so riddled with UFO sightings that the police stopped taking reports of UFOs decades ago. They were just too outnumbered. Some locals in the area say they were even injured while witnessing these strange things, such as bulletproof dire wolves, wormholes randomly appearing in the air, and humanoid creatures crawling out of translucent tunnels and running into the night. In other words, this city was like a Disneyland for aliens, especially Terry's land. They once found 3 rings of flattened grass, each about 8 feet across, set up in a triangle shape, about 30 feet apart. Other strange soil marks have been found in a nearby field. These are rings about 3 feet wide and a foot or 2 deep, with flattened dirt in the middle. To those familiar with alien encounters, we already know these as crop circles, a phenomenon that no one can explain, with its formation or perfect concentric circles that make people believe it can only be done by a higher life form or extraterrestrial. There is one night that lives rent-free in Terry's head. While out in one of the fields with the family dogs, Terry heard male voices speaking in a language he didn't know. More bizarre was that the voices seemed to be about 25 feet above him, but Terry couldn't see a thing when he looked up. The dogs were frantic. They barked and growled before running off to the ranch. Now, I know you might be wondering why they were still on that land, despite all the weird things they were seeing. Well, they had no money to go anywhere or start afresh. Everything was put into acquiring and fixing the property. But that was about to change. Soon after the sightings, the Shermans found one of their cows dead in a field. Its left eye had a strange hole in the middle of it. But other than that, it was completely clean and there was no sign of blood, which was very strange. There were no tracks, footprints, or signs of animals that had been there. Instead, all he got was this strange chemical-like odor coming from the dead cow. Not long after, another dead cow was found with a similar hole in its left eye and a 6-inch hole, only about an inch deep, carved out of its rectum. The same chemical smell was noticeable. Since the 1960s, reports of cattle being mutilated have been made all over the United States, especially in western states. Between April and October of 1975, nearly 200 cases of cattle mutilation were reported in the state of Colorado alone. It became a nationally recognized problem, so much so that Colorado's then-Senator Floyd Haskell asked the FBI to investigate the matter. In classic mutilation cases, the anus is cored out and the cow's udders and genitalia are removed, all with laser-like accuracy and no visible sign of blood. The Shermans, who keep a close watch on their cattle, believe they may have interrupted the mutilators before they were able to finish. Then, the cows began disappearing altogether. One even appeared to be lifted from the snow where it stood. The Shermans saw the cow's hoofprints lead into the field and followed it, but the prints stopped at the edge of the field near some trees. The area where the cow apparently took its last steps was surrounded by a circle of broken twigs and branches. Above, Terry noticed the tops of the trees appeared to have been cut off, insinuating the cow either flew off like Superman in Man of Steel or something took it from above. There were no hoof prints that continued after the point of disappearance. It was bizarre to the Shermans. The Shermans kept loosing their cows until, sadly, their last 3 cows were found dead in January in a clump of trees at the edge of the same field. The cow, which had been seen alive by their son just 5 minutes earlier, had a 6-inch wide, 18-inch deep hole cored out of its rectum and extending into the body cavity. There was no blood on the cow or the snow, and the same chemical odor was present. There was a circle of twigs around the fallen cow, and the tops of the trees looked severed. Their livelihood and dream of being a successful cow breeder was now gone. The cattle deaths and disappearances have been troubling, both psychologically and financially. The Shermans didn't want to say anything at first, but it was just too much that they had to conduct an interview with a reporter to tell everyone what the family was going through. Doing the research for this story, I watched a lot of videos, both the famous ones we would talk about in a minute, and some from other YouTubers who were also curious about this story. One thing that struck me was the uneasy feeling I felt watching the video. I could tell just by watching these videos that nobody who has the resources wants to stay that close to the land. It was like a keep-off zone even for locals who have lived there all their lives. You know how Chernobyl is kind of a keep-off zone, and despite some people saying the radiation isn't that bad, I wouldn't still go there because of its history. That's how this place felt to me. The whole event the Shermans experienced was similar to numerous strangers' events of alien encounters. But the locals say otherwise. Yes, there is an unnatural force roaming the land, but it's not alien, and it's more like a cursed spirit known as the Skinwalker. Originating from Navajo folklore, a Skinwalker is a malevolent witch capable of transforming into, possessing, or disguising themselves as an animal. Skinwalkers go by different names in different Native American tribes. A person can only become a Skinwalker by doing something heinous, like killing a family member or a loved one. This final act of their ritual gives them supernatural powers, allowing them to shapeshift from a human to an animal at will. They usually transform into coyotes, wolves, foxes, or any animal you could think of. The Navajo people blame Skinwalkers for everything that went wrong, including failed crops, bad marriages, sickness, sudden deaths, and more. And remember in the beginning of this video when I said, much fighting and death, the Ute lost, and they had to give up this land to the victors. But before they did that, they laid a curse on the land that unspeakable creatures and horrors of the night would trouble this land, the occupants, and their descendants till the end of time. It looked like the curse worked, and till today, the legend has been passed down, which is why locals avoid that area, giving the property its most famous name, Skinwalker Ranch. This could explain why the wolf Terry saw earlier behaved strangely, or the strange voices he heard above him. It could all have been a Skinwalker the family encountered. That's what makes this story puzzling. Aliens, or Skinwalkers, something is definitely on their land. Luckily, despite what happened at the ranch, the Shermans were able to find a seller. And no, they didn't lie to the new buyer. In such, the new buyer wanted to buy the ranch for the sole purpose of going through the horrific things the Shermans went through. In 1995, Mr. Robert Bigelow founded the National Institute of Discovery Science to to study paranormal phenomena the following year. He caught wind of the family's story, and it was perfect for the little experiment he wanted to conduct. So he bought the property from the Shermans for $200,000. Under the name of his new company, Bigelow did round-the-clock surveillance of the ranch, hoping to get to the bottom of the paranormal claims. Experts, cameras, securities, you name it. He had all the resources for this study. All he needed was just one proof, one video, or something to prove that we are not alone. These strange events also caught the attention of the Defense Intelligence Agency. With funding secured by Harry Reid, the former Democratic Senate Majority Leader, a Pentagon program was created to study unidentified flying objects, aka UFOs. This program is called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP for short. Now, here is where things started getting iffy and confusing. Even though witnesses claimed to have experienced paranormal occurrences on the property, Bigelow came out with a statement that basically said that after a decade of round-the-clock surveillance, he didn't see or find anything. And he was unable to scientifically validate the Sherman's stories. That brought up more questions for everyone. How could the Sherman experience all of that in 2 years, and then someone doesn't even see one single thing in 10 years? It's crazy. In other words, there were no aliens, but here's another thing. AATIP, through a contract, awarded to Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, made a 494-page study about supposed UFO sightings around the world over several decades. This 10-month report is mostly made up of notes, plans, and in-depth analyses of strange unexplained aerial phenomena. A former BAS worker even said that the BAS report was just a small part of what the Defense Intelligence Agency was given. They said that monthly reports were being sent to the Pentagon, in addition to annual program updates, that were all about UAP or anomalous phenomena. The program also paid for and released 38 studies. These hypothetical studies look at a wide range of complex, unusual, and advanced space issues, from detection and high-resolution tracking of vehicles at hypersonic velocities to warp drive, dark energy, and the manipulation of extra dimensions. Luis Elizondo put out these videos as part of an effort to bring more attention to the program. This was coming from a former U.S. Army counterintelligence special agent and former employee of the Office of the Under Secretary of Defense for Intelligence.
And some of these reports, you're absolutely correct, Jackie, they go back into the early 1950s and even earlier. And so what that says is that you have pilots, whether we're describing what we call a white flying Tic Tac or a white flying butane tank in the 1950s or a white flying lozenge, if you will, they're all describing the exact same vehicle, craft, if you will, doing exactly the same thing, performing in ways well beyond our current capabilities. And if you look at that from a temporal perspective, from a time perspective, it simply doesn't make sense that China back in 1950 would have this beyond next generation technology.
The Navy has also come out to admit that these videos were real, but only said that they showed what they thought were unidentified aerial phenomena. So, if the same company has proof of aliens all over the world, how come they didn't even find one in a place that is filled with so many mysteries? If the Shermans were UFO hunters, their ranch would be paradise. But when they bought the ranch 2 years ago, they weren't looking for strange lights in the sky. They were not looking to create a viral story. In such, the Sherman story blew to the point that a production company decided to come to the land and investigate for themselves, as well as record the events for viewers at home. The reality TV show is known as the Skinwalker Ranch, shown on the History Channel, and it has 4 seasons. It is massively famous and successful, with a lot of people eagerly waiting and watching for something to be revealed. The ranch was then sold by Bigelow to Adamantium Real Estate for about $500,000, and it is under their ownership that it acquired its now famous trademarked name, Skinwalker Ranch. The new owner, Brandon Fugal, still continued the show and still hopes to find proof. though he claims he has seen some of it.
I really saw nothing myself that would lead me to believe that there was anything unusual happening. Well, that all changed. And I had really, with multiple witnesses with me, an occasion where we saw what can only be described as an unidentified flying object, a craft, 40, 50 foot long silver disc, hovering right above the mesa, right in front of us. This wasn't just a blinking light in the sky or something that was a little bit ambiguous. This was a solid object that appeared out of nowhere, could move in the blink of an eye, and in fact, over about a 20-second period, perform maneuvers that I believe defy any propulsion physics that we're acquainted with, and was gone, literally.
This now contradicts what Bigelow said about not seeing anything for 10 years. So, who do we believe? The Shermans, Bigelow, or Brandon? A lot of critics find a lot of issues with the whole story. Some even think the story told by the Shermans could all be a lie. More grounded theories suggest that the strange sightings could be mass delusions, which is an extreme form of the power of suggestion, with people convincing themselves they're seeing what they expect to see. We have the dancing plague of the 15th century, a case of dancing mania that occurred in Strasbourg, wherein numerous people took to dancing for days, and some died. The famous Salem witch trials. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic in 1962 is another one, where 95 girls were hospitalized from too much laughing. Mass delusions and hysteria could be anything, and 8 times out of 10, no one knows what causes it. There are no traces of contamination in the air, food, or water, and that could be what happened to the Shermans. Between 1951 and 1962, a number of nuclear tests were held in rural Nevada. The fallout from these tests spread to Utah. There is no doubt that the radioactivity from the Nevada nuclear tests is still exposing people to radioactivity decades later. The point is that the general environment of the downwind states is still being polluted by radioactive elements from the Nevada nuclear tests, which could have caused the mass hysteria. As for the cow deaths, all of it could be attributed to some kind of illness or parasites spread among the herd. Those mysterious cattle disappearances, meanwhile, could indeed be all natural predators, or hunters seeking profit from premium beef. The results of a study done in 1980 in New Mexico by former FBI agent Ken Rommel Jr. found that some of the mutilations were caused by poisonous plants and animals that ate people. Also, remember the TV production. Normally, that is supposed to be a good thing, but that TV series did more harm than good when investigating this story. The Skinwalker series garnered believers, but as the show went on, it turned out to be a waste of time and ended up doing more harm than good, that even if something weird did happen, most people would say it was a lie, thanks to the Skinwalker Ranch series. When I was researching this series, there was a subreddit dedicated to how horse crap this show was, and these remarks were from believers. This was my first time seeing believers come out in unison to say, this show is crap. And after watching a few episodes on YouTube, I can totally see why. I mean, look at this. It's always, oh, something happened. Oh, all electronics died. But yet, the camera is rolling, and despite years of their investigation, nothing came up. Not even a single photo dump. Nothing. And it doesn't help matters that all court filings show Skinwalker Ranch is used for entertainment purposes. Most evidence is eyewitness accounts, and videos are edited for the TV show to be more dramatic. The current owner, Brandon Fugel, is working on turning that place into an amusement park centered around the lore. This is their website, if you don't believe me. Would you build an amusement park on a land that is filled with ghosts or aliens? Even if you could, the government would step in and say no. So, even if something crazy is happening on that land, all these events make it hard to believe. But of course, I am not naive. I am not all the way a critic. many questions still remain unanswered. Skinwalker Ranch remains a place of genuine strangeness, human or otherwise. When different cultures from different timelines say something is weird, there's a pretty good chance they are not lying.